everybody. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're from. My name is Holly Salazar. I am the CEO of the College for Behavioral Health Leadership, and I want to welcome you today to this important webinar offered in partnership with NIAPers and Human Innovations, who you'll hear about more in just a minute. As we're joining, you're seeing the chat box kind of flutter with names and names of participants and where they're from. Please continue to do that throughout the presentation. We'd love to know who's here joining us, and I'll put my name in there in just a bit. So just a few notes as we're preparing to kick this off about the College for Behavioral Health Leadership. So we are a national member-driven organization. We serve as a resource for leaders whose work focuses on or intersects with behavioral health. We offer leaders inspiration, tools, knowledge, and professional connections to work across sectors to eliminate inequities and improve health outcomes. And what really makes us different is our focus on cross-sector leadership and the involvement of our members as active participants or co-creators in our work. And so I'll put some more information about CBHL in chat in just a bit. And really, we're in the middle of our membership period now. So just a quick plug, I'll offer a 10% coupon off membership then if anybody wants to join today. So you're welcome to join us. So today's topic is important on many levels, in particular, given the crisis system transformations that are occurring around the country as we approach the 988 implementation later this year. Lived experience of crisis and peer support can be invaluable in this new system of care. And when we think about someone having somebody to talk to, someone to respond, and somewhere to go as part of the crisis system, this topic becomes invaluable. So I'm really thrilled to be working with NIAPers and Human Innovations today to offer today's webinar. So before we start, just a quick bit of housekeeping as I'm seeing the attendees continue to join us. We do want to hear from you today, so please be active in chat. We'd love to hear your questions, for you to share your comments, any aha moments. We'll engage with you throughout the presentation via the chat box, so please ask your questions there. There will be some time for Q&A at the end of the presentation. We will be recording this and we'll offer the slide deck. We'll make this available to you within 48 hours after the presentation. So yes to being able to receive the slides and a recording of today's presentation to share. So with that, I'd like to introduce Daniela from NIAPers, who's going to talk to you a little bit about continuing education.
Great, thanks, Holly. Welcome, everyone. My name is Daniela Labate-Cavelli. I'm with NIAPers. So we are really excited to offer continuing education units for New York State certified peers for today's presentation. We ask that you do a couple of things in order to qualify for those CEs, and it's 1.25 CEs for today. We ask that you're logged into the Zoom room and not just dialed in on the telephone. Everyone who attends today's webinar will be receiving an evaluation through the email address that you used to register for today's event. So really important to check your email. We'll be sending an evaluation link to that email address within 24 hours of the end of today's presentation. In order to get CEs, we ask that you click on that evaluation link and just peer CEs. I think there's actually a choice that you can, like a drop-down menu, and just indicate peer CEs or this that you're looking for, and then give us about a month to 6 weeks in order to create that CE and send it back to you via email. That's basically only two things, and obviously be engaged in today's conversation. We hope that you'll be part of the conversation, use the chat box like Holly said, ask questions. We hope to hear from all of you today in some way, shape, or form. So with that, I'm going to actually turn over to the NIAPers CEO, Harvey Rosenthal, for a brief introduction from NIAPers.
Thank you, Daniela, and hi, everybody. It's another big crowd, and we so appreciate your interest in this and hope that I'm confident you're going to take this work forward and help a lot of people using the power of peer support. I want to just say of NIAPers, we're the New York Association of Psychiatric Rehabilitation Services. We are a statewide partnership that's 40 years old that has worked for all those decades to improve services and social conditions and public policies to advance the lives, health, wellness, and rights of people with psychiatric diagnoses or disabilities. And to do that through advancing recovery rights, rehabilitation, community inclusion, peer support, spending a lot of time on crisis in New York State and nationally. So I see a lot of people in the crowd that I'm so grateful to see, but I want to acknowledge one who is Dana Anthony, and I want to put in the chat box the link to the National Association of Peer Supporters. Wait a minute, I got to put it to all, not just the hosts. This is not a secret. This is for all of you here. So I really want to encourage you to consider that organization. And while I'm talking about organizations, the College for Behavioral Health Leadership is so important. I'm so glad you're here with us and with them. Previously, it was called the American College on Mental Health Administration, or ACMA. And there's someone on with us today, Ron Manershai, who is just such a historic figure in that. And to give you an example, ACMA at a conference several years ago, many years ago, where Ron introduced for me and most of us, we'd never heard social determinants of health. So that's what ACMA does, or the college does, is bring ideas, cutting edge ideas, well in advance, and connects us all. So many people who are here, and connect us all to do this good work that we do. I met Eduardo at an ACMA conference in New Mexico, and that's an example. There's a relationship that really began there. He's a historic figure, and besides all the work he does in peer support, and he's worked so many sort of settings, I don't have time to read his bio. But the thing I do want to say, he's not only an educator, a trainer, an innovator, but he's an advocate. And years ago, he organized a couple of demonstrations in Washington, and NIAPRS was very engaged in that. And it was a really special moment. We gathered in the area near the Capitol, and it was a really special moment. So Eduardo does a lot of tremendously important things. And so I'm going to stop talking and introduce you to Eduardo.
Hi there, folks, and really great to see you. Thanks. Always great to connect with NIAPRS people, and also to reconnect with CBHL. CBHL and previously ACMA was really important in my growth, getting to meet people like Harvey, like Ron here, and others, and enabling me to go from a place of being a kind of a passionate advocate with mixed feelings about the mental health system to somebody who had the opportunities to connect with others, to learn, and to really advance not just my career, but really my impact. I think that's the biggest thing. That's the privilege that we get through what's leadership, which is the ability to make a difference, and to enhance the difference that we can make, the quality of it, and often the quantity as well. So everybody here is joining us, and you're great leaders. And we had a poll we were going to get ready to launch. I want to do that so we can know a little bit more about who's showing up here. And I see a note that I'm speaking quietly. Okay. I have a sophisticated microphone system, and I've heard before that it's too loud. So feel free to give me a thumbs up, or particularly Holly or Daniela, if you could let me know if I'm fading out or anything. I appreciate that. So Daniela, are we able to launch the first of the polls there?
We are. Eileen is going to pull it for us momentarily. Just let Eileen know when you want to launch it. There you go.
Let's do it. Now we have two polls that are about you. And the first is about your professional role. And then the second is about your lived experience, or what we sometimes call lived expertise. So please respond to this, and it'll help us get a sense of who you are, because this is a really important subject, and I speak with and meet with people kind of around the world who are approaching this subject from various points of view. And that's actually the really great opportunity here in our field and in the world, is with some of this transformative stuff which is happening for in the domain of crisis support. You're going to hear me use the word crisis support, not crisis intervention so much, that there's a whole bunch of people are bringing new kinds of focus and expertise. We're going to talk particularly about lived expertise, which is my word for the integration of lived experience into programs and services, and actually policy as well. So when people bring their lived experience into the mix, they're bringing their personal story, but also a connection to how they can use their story, how that experience can make a difference, whether it's talking to a governor or meeting with a peer who's experiencing distress. Right. This is really interesting. And I'm going to go ahead and bring my slides up here. And I also want to make sure to introduce here my my colleague Lisa. She'll be helping us today, and it's going to be is just an amazing person to work with.
Thank you, and I'm glad to be here.
Are we seeing the right slides? Hold on.
Nope, not yet.
All right, thank you. Okay.
There you go.
There we go. Okay. Oh. Sorry, I'm having a little technical difficulty with my slides here. I'm going to stop the share for a second. As I do this, I want to introduce Lisa. Lisa Gooddale is our partner here at NIAPRA, or at Humanivations. She's been doing excellent work with me in our training program. If you guys could just, for a minute, maybe Lisa, could you review the poll and tell us who's showing up here? And
I can, except it has disappeared. Could I see it again? Could it pop up here? I know that most of the people here are peer specialists, people who are delivering peer support services. I do remember that. And a fair amount of people who are administrators of programs as well. Thank you so much. All right. And it looks like mental health service provider. About a quarter of the people here today. Variety here. Some of you are already providing crisis services or working in a hotline or a contact center. And of course, we're always glad to see change champions and advocates. I think maybe we all are that, right, in many ways, but it's a fair amount as well. And mental health program manager. All right. A few researchers, and I guess we don't have anybody in law enforcement or corrections right now, but that may change. Thanks.
Excellent. How are we doing? Are we seeing this? Are you seeing the slides now?
Yes, we are.
Yes. Great. And so I want to also just put out there that what we're doing here, actually the work that you're seeing here is going to be built upon by the new Palliance Institute for Peer Support and Lived Experience, which is our research and training division that we hope a lot of you will sort of connect to as well as we build really a fund of knowledge and a community of learning around how to take peer support, peer alliance as we call it, to the next level in terms of making systems change and helping people grow. So Humanivations is a social impact company. We're driven by lived expertise. Folks that work for us bring both a combination of professional and lived experience. You can see a couple of our programs here are growing through and peer support spaces. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about growing through as an example. again, Lisa here, our training maven, has just been an amazing partner and formerly vice president of the Depression and Bipolar Support Alliance, as well as having developed many peer specialist and peer support programs through them and with the Departments of Veterans Affairs as well. I'm going to put in here, I'm not going to talk too much about myself. I want to kind of use this opportunity, though, to connect the dots between sort of the work that we do and our lived experience, and how do we sort of make lived expertise kind of happen. So I'm doing something a little bit different here. Now, this is a good time to launch the second poll, which is specifically asking about your lived experience. Because when we think about lived experience, and admittedly, we're talking here about a lived experience of struggle as opposed to lived experience of great things. We want to recognize that this is part of the value that we bring. This is part of our resource when we talk about creating, providing peer support to anybody, really. Because as you'll hear me say, we're all peers in suffering. And none of us are peers in all ways. But we also have different types of lived experience that can be relevant to a conversation and that can provide the foundation for peer alliance as we're sort of advancing the concept of peer alliance. Like, where do we ally? Where do we have shared meaningful experiences? And so here at the bottom, obviously there's stuff on my credits here, and you're welcome to go to our website at humanovations.net to read more about me. But I also wanted to point out, really, and I've done this for the first time here in my little bio page, talk about some of my lived experience. So I first became involved with this work, that's to say, mental health crisis work, as a volunteer hotline worker at my university when I was about 22. And by that time, I had already had experience with addiction recovery and several other things, criminal justice involvement as a youth, etc. But nobody knew at that time that I had only survived a suicide attempt just a couple months before that. So back at that time in the 80s, we did not have peer support at all. And in fact, people were pretty actively discouraged from ever bringing their lived experience into the conversation. However, as some of you know, it was actually some of this experience, my lived experience, that actually got me involved in this work, like probably a lot of people. So here I've also mentioned down here, that I'm a survivor of clerical sex abuse, housing insecurity. In addition to surviving 2 suicide attempts myself, I also live with a psychiatric disability, and I identify, as a loss survivor in the sense of having lost several friends and close family members to suicide as well. So this lived experience becomes really important when we start to talk about how do we make peer support real in the context of crisis and intensity. All right. Can we show the results of our poll here? By the way, it's really important to know people know the polls are totally anonymous. Maybe that wasn't clear, but obviously you're only expected to disclose as much as you like. But anyway, this is really useful for us to see here who's showing up, because it's important, because we recognize that, hey, there's all these different kinds of lived experience. And when we're talking about working in the context of peer support, when people are having a really tough time, all of these things become some of the resources that people with lived experience can uniquely bring to the situation, can bring to a peer in pain, as we sometimes call it. So I want to just kind of focus a little bit on sort of this transformational view that we're going to try to advance when it comes to crisis, and I'll tell you a little bit why. But here's a quote: when you're overwhelmed by despair, all you can see is suffering. You feel as if the worst thing is happening to you. But we must remember that suffering is a kind of mud that we need in order to generate happiness. So if we start to look at suffering in the context of crisis differently, we can really bridge some of these issues that are at the core of this kind of dilemma I'm going to talk about for a minute. But again, most of you were on the previous webinar, so here's kind of like a view of like the conceptual universe, the way we might like to see it. Like, so peer support, our subject right here at the intersection of mental health systems, crisis intervention, suicide prevention, and peer support. And then 988 is a question, because this in the U.S. this is the big question about how it's going to affect this. But again, for those of you who weren't on, remember that this is actually much more of an accurate sort of model of what things look like in our behavioral health systems, at least in the U.S. That's to say, the intersections of these things are not equal. And 988, the 988 direction for crisis support is really unbalancing and shifting a lot of these around, which represents a lot of opportunity, as we know, to kind of reform this universe in the way we want to. And again, just referencing, previously, where peer crisis or peer support exists most typically is in these above kind of service sectors. Sometimes it's called sub-threshold needs. So maybe, people connecting through an online peer support group, or going to in-person peer support groups. People who are sort of maintaining their recovery in an everyday basis, and are accessing peer specialist supports for life transition, employment support, etc. And then historically here, the red arrows point to the places where we want to see peer crisis support. We need to see peer crisis support really advance. And so people experiencing distress and what's sometimes called subacute intensity, that's to say they're not going to go to the hospital right now, but probably maybe just getting an appointment for a therapist in 2 weeks is not really going to cut the mustard either. And they're looking for something that we can bring as people with lived experience to the table, in addition to what might be more informal supports, or other things. Now, here in intensive services, inpatient hospitalization, partial hospital, and sometimes intensive outpatient, and residential treatment facilities, the amount to which peer specialists, peer support is actually kind of integrated into that really varies a lot. It's obviously much more than it has been in the past, particularly here in the U.S. Still very, very marginal in other countries. But this other area of kind of crisis support, what's sometimes called acute, acute psychiatric situations, emergency situations that sometimes where people are going either through mobile crisis or some other way, or in a kind of outreach. Peer support has not been involved with that systemically. Now we can see here that there are lots of opportunities, and we're starting to see more and more, around the country. But as we move into 988, I think that you're all in agreement that this sort of resource of peer support, the resource of lived experience, combined with practical skills for support in times of intensity, can really make a difference in all of these different settings. In what are sometimes called stabilization units, I worked for many years in what we'll call community crisis houses. And in fact, a lot of my training or my orientation to this content came from working in places, this is before we had peer respite, that were mostly staffed by non-professionals, or what are sometimes called paraprofessionals in the field. But that really provided really useful, supportive possibilities for folks at their hardest moments. Now again, the other place that we have not seen peer support be sort of structurally validated, but where it kind of exists, is also in phone and text-based crisis contact programs. So I've worked with crisis centers around the country and a little bit in other countries to help them think about how to integrate lived experience and how people with lived experience can work and how peer support can be brought into that. But I think it's still really developing. So what are the challenges here that we're facing? And again, you know, a couple of these slides are a repeat from last time, but I just want to highlight these because it's going to go to the intersection where we're going to talk about what are possible solutions for this. So the challenges that I've seen and that I've seen people express and that I hear around the kind of behavioral health systems relate to a few different things. One of them, unfortunately, I think is just what we would call systemic low expectations, and sometimes stigma or discrimination related to people with lived experience. The biggest kind of what would sometimes be called benevolent stigma, as we would call it, and this would be something like, well, you know, peers, you know, shouldn't be put in this place where they're gonna, you know, maybe you know, see bad things happening, or it would activate people's underlying mental health condition to be in these stressful environments. So therefore, we wouldn't want to do that. That, you know, and that we should never discount that, because I want to, you know, I've been doing this work for a long time, and I've seen lots of kind of good intentions around this. And there are, you know, going over here to the right, there are genuine concerns. You know, will people be, you know, have a traumatic activation or be themselves impacted in a way as a result of living with a mental health condition, or even having a prior related experience of trauma. So it's not to say that those things are not valid. There's some validity to that. But also, I think the thing that we really need to always be challenging is this idea that people with lived experience, you know, might not have as much to bring to the table, or might be challenged in their skills or their, you know, their self-management or coping in a way that would make them ineffective in crisis services. So let's just make sure that we're always looking at that, because that's kind of the foundation of a lot of what I've seen in terms of structural concern, structural resistance to integration of peer support. And of course, this goes back, as Harvey will tell you, many years in the mental health system in general. When we start to talk about situations related to, you know, crisis, as it's called, or you know, threats of violence, threats of suicide, this sort of thing, these kind of concerns seem to come up more. Now, the other thing I really want to focus on here is that, in general, what I've seen around the U.S. is that the scope of work for peer specialists almost never includes support in times of crisis. And as we know, historically, a lot of the experience has been like peer support, you know, has been accepted, has been really embraced, actually, and can be really core supportive service. But when things get intense, the idea is, okay, you know, now it's got to be referred up. There's got to be a psychiatrist or a clinician involved, and the peer specialist doesn't have a clearly defined role in the scope of what might be called crisis services. So, and then the other thing is, like, a lot of this is just kind of like uncertainty, and limited practice and evidence. Now, of course, there are things happening, and of course, like, New York has Rose House, and other places have been doing peer respite, which are very important. What I'm talking about here, though, and what I think we're all really focused on, is how can we bring peer support and lived experience into the workforce, into the whole service array, in a really at the level in which it could be useful, which to me is very broad. Now, when we talk about these challenges, let's also think about, you know, how do people with lived experience challenge? What are the things that we are thinking about, or that they are thinking about? One of the biggest ones is the clash of values between what's sometimes called recovery values or peer support values, and things that are sort of associated with crisis services, whether it's a kind of an outreach, certainly coercion and law enforcement involvement at an intervention level. Those things feel like they don't really align with peer support in a lot of ways, and certainly with the peer advocate values. There are these other issues. We're going to come back to this one because I think it's really at the core. Concerns around people being activated and re-traumatized. Yeah, I talked about that on the systems side, so to speak. Also, people themselves wonder about these things, and I've trained many people, who just need like a little bit more confidence, but may have had rough times. Now, the important thing to remember is, hey, those rough times are kind of the value, right? That's the value that people might be bringing. When we talk, this kind of connects again to the values, but there is a lot of concern around in the community of people who sort of identify with peer advocacy or the consumer movement related to coercion. And I would say even to what was sometimes called a gatekeeper model. That's to say, the gatekeeper model, for those of you who, is kind of based around this idea that I'm going to connect with you when you're having a hard time. I'm going to help you get to a provider, or I'm going to help you get, maybe into a hospital or into a service. Not to say that function isn't helpful sometimes, but the idea that the job of someone is really to move someone along to somebody else, to a trained professional, works against some of the processes. Obviously, again, we're still having this sort of uncertainty thing, and to my point of view, a big part of the challenge really in both sides relates to the lack of specialized training for integrating lived experience and peer support. So I'm proposing here a few fundamentals that I want you to consider, and you don't have to agree with them, but just a couple of things that we're going to proceed from. So my proceeding is, I proceed from these understandings. The effective use of lived experience must be, and peer support in crisis-related services must be based in the unique values and distinctive competencies of peer support. That's to say, not as an adaptation of something else. Traditional de-escalation, takedown, services advocacy, that's to say, like, kind of, advocating for people to get into services, etc., and gatekeeper models are based in situation management and to some degree often containment, or maybe sort of violence prevention, suicide prevention in the classic sense, rather than the recovery model, or what you're going to hear me talk about it, the growth recovery model, and shared meaningful experience. So this is a fundamental kind of clash of perspectives, right? I have personally been trained in years back in sort of classic crisis intervention, and a lot of that was basically how to take people down, right? And obviously, and try to not hurt people. But guess what? That's not really a recovery approach. And in most cases, those kinds of things are not actually really what's called for in the situation. Third concept here, traditional clinical and crisis intervention models are limited in their ability to bridge the values and distinctive competency of peer support through adaptation. That's to say, even though we're kind of looking for the same thing, that's to say helping people, reduce their distress, come down from, a point of intense discomfort, those models that we're talking about can't necessarily themselves bridge this problem very well by just kind of adapting. That's to say, bringing a peer supporter into a mobile crisis program is a great idea, and people are doing it. But what I've seen works, so to speak, when that actually happens, is that the mobile crisis program actually adapts to bring this value, to amplify the distinctive competency of peer support by changing its model. So if we're just going to kind of have this, sort of whatever, maybe a joint response model or a psychiatric emergency, psychiatric urgent care model, and plug peer supporters in there, that might not work so well. So what's the solution? Our solution that I would propose is that we need an approach to crisis support and what some people call distress reduction that's grounded in recovery and peer alliance. Okay, I'm getting a message that I need to speak louder, so I'm going to speak louder. And I think actually the issue is that there's a little bit of resonance here in my room, so I sound really loud. But thank you for letting me know, Lisa. So our solution is this something distinctive. We need to bridge this in a way that's intentional and that's founded in what we call peer alliance and the growth recovery model. So looking at this for a second, I'm going to talk you through what we've sort of distilled down at the Appliance Institute and stuff like that as these kind of core competencies. But I want to start with a little bit of something tracking into the situation that people encounter, right? What do we know about, in particular, I'm going to talk a lot about suicide prevention today, because I think that's suicidal intensity. That's a lot of the context here. But we do know one thing, which is that about 50 million people experience thoughts of suicide each year. Close to about 40 experience intensely disturbing thoughts as reported. And on the other hand, the feeling of being alone, the feeling of being isolated, is pretty powerful when it comes to suicidal intensity, suicide SI, and suicide attempts. Right? If anybody's been there, you know that that's not that makes a lot of sense. So here's a really interesting perspective, right? There are all these people who feel isolated, and that both causes and amplifies thoughts and feelings related to suicide. And on the other hand, there are all these people out there who have personal lived experience of suicide. So this kind of gets to the value of peer support, that we could reduce isolation just by being able to talk to people who have been there. So what's the essential role here? And what really does peer support do very well, in contrast maybe to some other of the practices in the field? Well, I would argue that the most important thing that we do in peer support is enable someone to feel heard as equals. And when people feel heard, truly heard, it makes a big difference. These are just a couple of things that people come up with in our courses. People feel valued. When you feel heard, you feel a sense of relief. You feel important even. And people feel like they're less alone. And this, again, is the special thing, because it does make a difference. In my personal experience, most people will tell you, when you're talking with someone who's been there, particularly if there is a place that's highly stigmatized or that's associated with taboo, like death by suicide, thoughts of death, threats of violence, to some degree trauma, and other things, right? People with lived experience can enable people to feel heard in a special way. They can enable a peer alliance that moves from people feeling apart from each other to people feeling a part of a community. Maybe that community is based in a very specific kind of struggle, and there are obviously other ways to join together. But the people who have been there can be this really powerful resource, and this point of connection around our suffering enables us to get together in really special ways. So take a minute to move from the sort of the philosophical to really the practical. And what we've identified here is 4 areas, 4 domains of peer support competencies for crisis. And each of them has 3 different aspects as well. So authentic peer alliance, presence and intensity, crucial moment partnering, sharing strength and struggle. So these I'm kind of boiling these down from we do a couple of different trainings, but the kind of the big picture. These are the 4 things that I think people with lived experience really need to have as strengths, as sort of practices in their toolkit. And what does this look like? So authentic peer alliance, and we call this alliance, is based on equality of status. That's the really essential point of a peer support model as opposed to other helping models. That's to say, we are equals in this. It's also based in shared meaningful experience. So we might not have the same experience of suffering or trauma or crisis, but we've got some. And also this spirit of service. That's to say, the desire to give care, connecting around these things is an active practice. Again, this is sort of the more higher competency level, but each of these have very specific ways of approaching them. And then the growth recovery mindset. And again, I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that looks like, but how that might be a different frame for establishing an authentic alliance on a peer basis. Second competency domain, presence and intensity. Now this relates most just to the ability to be present and to be supportive and to be truly helpful when things are very intense. And that's to say, when somebody may be so overwhelmed by emotion that they can't speak, or all they can do is yell or scream, or that they can't see you, so to speak, visually. How can we be present in those moments? And I would suggest that this is a kind of a skill domain that anybody can kind of develop. Some people have a little better kind of fundamental capacity for it. But it's really important, because when we're approaching this stuff from a peer point of view, what we need to recognize is we want to be, first of all, if we get activated, and I would suggest this is not just about peer supporters, this is about really anybody, but if you are activated emotionally by the way that somebody else is coming off, whether they're screaming and it's angering you or something else, or they're talking about death or things that like are frightening to you, you can't really bring as much of yourself to the table as you might. Or what we would sometimes say is, you might want to do something to somebody because what's really happening is it's difficult for you to be with them. So being present in the context of intensity is this core domain. I'm sorry for this, I don't really know what's happening. Okay. So the third area, crucial moment partnering. That's to say, how to partner on a peer support, on a peer alliance basis when things are really intense, including in the moments when maybe somebody's in the middle of taking action to end their lives. Somebody is, throwing things or so agitated that they want to like hurt somebody else. And there are 4, again, we call this sort of 4 competencies under this domain. Clarifying urgency and an emergency. That's the ability to be able to say, hey, this is a really intense situation. This feels like an emergency to me. We got to do something about it. A suicide emergency is a great example, and that's the word that we would use. You're talking about, and this happened to me recently. You're talking about, going to your car tonight, and using carbon monoxide to kill yourself. That sounds really intense and you're thinking about this today, that sounds like an emergency to me. What can we do about this together? Suicide talk is a very specific thing that a lot of people do not feel comfortable with, but really is, I think, essential in this work, which is the ability to just be able to talk about um, uh, thoughts and feelings of wanting to kill yourself, which are not that unusual, in an open, supportive way. And then the context also for partnering is enlisting others. Like, this is a time, maybe you're talking about something really intensely traumatic. Can we work together to find a therapist that works in this area? That might be one approach. Find a resource, maybe it's a rape crisis shelter or something like that. Or, bring in a crisis support worker or something like that in the case of an imminent suicide risk, etc. And then lethal means reduction. And lethal means reduction is something that is really powerful and very important when it comes to somebody thinking about taking action to end their lives, which is the ability to be able to talk with someone about specifically how do we reduce this risk. Does it mean giving your gun to your cousin to take it away for a while? Can we work together to, throw those pills down the toilet or something like that, as opposed to keeping them in? So these core skills in a peer support context are really important. And then the fourth thing, and again, this is very distinctive to peer alliance and peer support, is sharing strength and struggle. Not just the ability to do that, but how and where to do that. So when we talk about offering shared experience, we're talking about how do we do this? What might we do? What's the right time to do that? How do we do it in a way that's really respectful and also how do we make sure that we avoid advice giving, because advice does not help, and peer support should never be about giving advice. And if you ask me if peer support should ever be about giving you advice, I'll tell you my favorite thing to say is that peer support is not about giving advice. But I'm glad to discuss that more. There's also this area of managing the therapy zone. So it's important, and this is not just for peer supporters, but particularly for people who might not be trained professionals in the sort of clinical service there, to understand where does what I'm doing really fit with peer alliance, with peer support. How am I showing up, for you in this moment? And also being really clear about when things are going into this zone, that's really the appropriate domain of psychotherapy, in some way, related to some past trauma with childhood, etc. And then finally, this fourth competency, connecting to difference. Now, we talk a lot about shared meaningful experience. It's also important to recognize that even though we share some meaningful experience, we also share differences. And sometimes understanding first of all, that I don't understand my peers' reality, but being able to kind of get in there and connect with it, and use that as a mechanism to understand their world better, and to understand our own lives better. Doing that on a level of equals really helps us get together and align both around struggle and also around strength and growth. So, I'm going to introduce you briefly to the growing through model that employs some of this, so that you can see a little bit about how these things can be brought into an advanced, we call growing through an advanced peer crisis training. It is a training that it uses this growth-focused approach to foster alliance. And the goal really is, in the context of crisis, to think about fostering meaning-making and fostering purpose. So the really crucial thing about growing through and other models like it is that if we look at crisis in the context of people's growth, we know that the hardest moments in life are the ones that we tend to grow through the most. And so when people are experiencing intensity of very different sorts, they deserve something better than to be feared, or I would suggest, put in the back of a police car in handcuffs. People deserve a connection to others. They deserve to be respected, because these moments they're going through might feel hard, but they also might be really important. They deserve the opportunity to connect with others who have been there, maybe. And then of course, alternatives to what we have had available, that are grounded in dignity are really, really essential. So this growth recovery model is really kind of based on the idea that, like, if we see what is sometimes called growth from the point of view of personal development and transformation, then we recognize that what's happening, as bad as it might seem, as distressing as it might be to people around the individual as well, it actually might be a really significant part of people's growth. Many people who've survived suicide attempts, myself included, will tell you about how important those moments were in finding a life that was really essential for them. The problem is that though we look at this, the image of transformation as this beautiful butterfly, that's the kind of the stereotype, what we often don't recognize is that experience is much more like this. For a lot of people, they're very difficult moments, and we feel isolated and we feel all this intensity. So growing through is about kind of connecting this, the range of, peer alliance, peer support, suicide prevention in this growth recovery model. I'm not going to go through the details here, but I do want to just point out a couple of things, which is that in our model we talk about the 5 Ds, and this is a kind of a humanizing alternative language that relates to how an individual might experience distress, that's emotional discomfort, that connects to an experience of disability, like being unable to get out of bed, or maybe unable to show up at work in the way you would like to, and as these things evolve, despair is a common thread. When people are despairing and they're experiencing a lot of distress, thoughts of death are not that unusual. And if we choose this kind of normalizing vocabulary to get away from the idea that suicidal ideation is a psychiatric problem. It isn't. It comes from a place of difficulty, but it's also a very human experience. So this kind of floats into the area in suicide prevention that we talk about, or suicidology, where we talk about risk factors, isolation being a big one. We also want to talk about, and from our growth point of view, what's sometimes called protective factors. And these things relate to the ability to be able to connect with other people. Sometimes some specific techniques around finding relief in the moment, etc. So I'm going to skip off of this and just go to our other things. But there's one thing. Oh, did I undo? Did I accidentally unshare? I think I did. Okay. There's one thing that I want to highlight, which is a couple of points here. So one of them is that the relationship is really the key when it comes to peer support, and also that we can look at support for individuals from a values point of view. That's to say, looking at what people are going through from the point of view of this growth model. And also that recognizing that, in a certain way, all people are on a journey. And one alternative way of thinking about the sort of experience of crisis or intensity is through this hero's journey model. Now, most of you have probably heard of the hero's journey in some fashion or another, but the point is that the hero becomes a hero through experiencing loss, through undergoing travail, often really losing a sense of themselves, etc. And this is repeated in world literature. It's fundamental to the sort of humanistic perspective on psychological development and growth. But it's often really represented this way, like there's an individual hero, and eventually they manage to destroy the dragon or the evil foe, and then they bring things back, this value back to their community. But there is another model, and as a Lord of the Rings fan, I always like to bring this up. Oh, it's not working here. Huh. Let's see. Which is here represented by Frodo. You can see this on the left, who has this terrible, difficult task of bringing the ring to Mordor. It creates intense emotional distress for him, and Frodo has a peer supporter. He's got Sam here with him, and Sam it's not Sam's journey. This is the important thing to recognize. And Sam is not an expert. He's not a fighter. He's not a magician. He doesn't have any special skills, but he does bring this powerful alliance, this pure alliance, and his presence to the journey of personal difficulty and struggle that Frodo goes through. So I'm glad to talk with you more about this, and really want to just kind of dig into some of these concepts again. So I'll bring up this slide again so that we can zero in on some of the peer support competencies ideas. Love to hear your thoughts on any of that. We're at the top of the hour here now, so we're going to go ahead and open it up for questions. Glad to see there's been a lot of talk in the chat. And Lisa, anything that we noticed that you really, or questions that you think would be great for us to talk about?
Well, we need another hour, I think, but there are many things. So let me, without placing a value judgment, because there's been a very robust dialogue. First of all, some people have commented that they really appreciate the language that you use in terms of non-pathologizing terms. So wanted to pass that on. There's been a lot of dialogue. You mentioned earlier about bringing peers into situations versus trying to have clinical staff somehow adopt some of those values, maybe not in a very helpful way. So there has been a lot of dialogue and people talking about the value of peer specialists, and it depends on the clinician on whether they want to adopt the values of peer support. One comment. Peer support values were being taught to clinicians, and some could not relate to the practice because they did not have either the lived experience or weren't in a place where they felt they could share. So not a question, but I guess a comment. And lots of people talking about.
Are you able to come on video?
I can, if you would like me to. Yeah, all right. So anyway, lots of dialogue about peers and their unique role. And let me find an actual question here because there have been a lot of good comments here. Let's see.
The other thing is we can just open it up if anybody wants to pose a question now or something.
Okay. Well, I have one that is truly a question, and I kind of lost it at the beginning. So one person brings up that there are now growing organizations and initiatives offering peer support for people like first responders, law enforcement, firefighters, and veterans also. Wanting to know any of your thoughts on linking and supporting each other with developing peer support models in those venues where peer support may not have been present before.
Um, yeah, that's a really good question and very important. I actually have been doing a lot of work in the private sector and with groups like that recently in the last couple of years, working with folks in construction to develop their peer support programs, et cetera. And and I think this is a really powerful, actually, connecting point um, because I think the one thing that we do see outside of the behavioral health system is that people really value peer support almost in a slightly different way in that because it it takes them out of sort of maybe power relationships that can be problematic, etc., and really gives people the ability, yeah, to connect around specific experiences. Yeah. So as an example, I don't have lived experience of being um, uh, a police officer or a law enforcement person, but I've worked with many. But I can tell you one thing, which is that they have some very specific experiences that they want to be able to talk about with others. So peer support, you know, really has this very wide-ranging applicability. Today, due to who we're hosting and who we're seeing in this call, focusing a lot on the system, but there's a lot of great connecting points there.
Mhm.
So I'm glad to hear people mentioning it.
Here's another comment from Richard, and his comment is that we do need an ongoing forum for peer first responders to share de-escalation practices, community roles, and community partnerships, but also to tie together with clinical services in organizations. So comments, thought about a forum for that to happen?
No, I love that, and I would love to talk more about that and have your contact information as we're working on our the Palliance Institute. One of the things we're doing is kind of growing learning communities around some of these different areas, and particularly like the implementation and integration of services in this area. So I'm very hopeful to be able to hear from people, and Lisa can put our information in the chat if you want to reach out to us.
Absolutely. I would
Um,
do too. So lots of comments and questions. Here's another one from another Richard. His comment is, we have to coexist with crisis response as usual, and I'll put quotes around as usual. Any thoughts about that? This is a transition period, I guess, for peers now being involved in much more widely in crisis response that has not always included them.
yeah, sorry, I'm not entirely sure about the question there, Lisa.
I think it's crisis response as usual, which, as you noted earlier, was tends to be a lot about control and getting somebody into services and not necessarily connecting on a peer level. That those still exist, and now peers are coming into the field, and they may be coexisting or perhaps trying to change those systems.
Yeah, it kind of goes to at first, I think that it is important to recognize that there's been a lot of progress and a lot more resources being developed. And, with the 988 initiative at the state and local communities, we're seeing a lot more energy being put into that are more supportive, that are, maybe less site-based as previous, and around the country for many years, there's been a development on related to even integration of peer supporters on joint response teams, et cetera, where with a clinician and a law enforcement or first responder. So all of those are happening, and the degree to which peer support, and the distinctive competencies of peer support are being integrated, that's the thing that I think where we're really still just finding our way, and so that's really where the rubber hits the road for a lot of this, right? How do we, and it gets back to the point that I made my sort of formative thesis points, which are that you can't just take an existing model and plug a peer specialist or a really well-trained peer supporter into it. because those models don't historically know how to utilize the resource of lived experience in that distinctive way. So, where we see these things being implemented, like I said, I've seen some successes. I've seen some real challenges too. I've seen downright failures. And what we want to do, I think, is, we need all these different types of expertise at the table, to get to something that looks like a place where people might want to reach out and get support that feels empowering, that feels healing, and doesn't feel like punishment.
Yeah. I know we're getting short on time, but Ron Anderscheid has a question he'd like to pose. Ron? And I hope you're not muted because we're not hearing you.
I'm sorry, Lisa. We're actually unable to unmute.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
So we'll have to read his question. Yeah.
All right. Do we have it in the chat? I'm sorry, I didn't see it there. I'm looking for it desperately. Okay. Ron, if you can type quickly, that would be fabulous, because I do not see it unless I am missing it.
Yeah, the thing, one of the things, as an example, I started working with a new joint response mobile crisis unit in Northern California, and they had some resources from the state, and they were really committed to the idea of bringing peer supporters in. So my agency, we contracted to provide the peer supporters. But it was really tough. Like the clinical staff that had set up the model didn't really know what to do with folks. There was a lot of mistrust early on. I'm just being honest. And we had to kind of create a ongoing dialogue, where it was not just about how, whether or why peer supporters should be involved, but what was the distinctive competency? That's why I would get back to this idea of this distinctive competencies related to peer support. What is it that a person with lived experience can bring, and in what way that is different from what other people are bringing? Not better, but also distinctively valuable. And what we saw exactly over the course of a year in this program is actually the team came to love the peer support staff that were working with them. It really changed the program in all sorts of really powerful ways, and they were able to connect with folks in ways they never had.
I have Ron's question if we've got time to squeeze it in. Thank you, Ron. It is 988's a new opportunity to include social determinants in the lived experience model. How will we move ahead with this?
Yeah, it kind of gets a little bit to the sort of probing questions that we asked around what's the lived experience that people are bringing to the table here, and some of those lived experiences are experienced just on the sort of fundamental level of being non-privileged, or having experienced the legacy of racism in various ways, and so that's a great example of where it's useful. And as an example, a couple of years ago I developed a peer support training program for a very big homeless outreach project here in Los Angeles, and so the focus was not on mental health lived experience, but the experience of of being unhoused and all the challenges that go along with that, and how do people, and so there are these various specific ways in which shared experience, just somebody who can say, yeah, oh, I've been there, or I know a little bit about what that's like, can really add this special component, whether there is about having experienced childhood sexual abuse, whether there is about wanting to die every day for 5 years, that sort of thing. So the social determinants become really, really important also, because it enables people to see that these things are all connected, and that recovery is not just about an individual's journey, you know, in a sort of a perfect or even playing field, you know, but it's about people growing and developing their strengths and healing from systemic problems that don't affect everybody the same way.
All right. And I think we may be at the end of our time.
Yeah, so I think we are just a couple of minutes out. So Eduardo and Lisa, I want to thank you, first of all, for the excellent training, the session today. I think just from the chat comments and engagement, we certainly need to keep these conversations going. So we'll talk about future webinars, trainings, leadership discussions that we can engage everybody in. If you have final questions, I'll share just really quickly some email contact information. So if anybody's interested in reaching out for more information, you're welcome to contact me or Harvey or Eduardo. I think he shared his information earlier, but we'll make sure you have access to that. Contact us with questions. And in the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful week and appreciate the time that you spent with us here today. Thank you for joining.